The quilt smelled like lavender and lye soap. I remember that because I buried my face in it. I pressed my whole face into the fabric so hard the stitching left a pattern on my cheek. Little diamonds over and over. And I stayed like that until I couldn't breathe. The bedroom was cold. Not winter cold, but that kind of damp October cold that sits in the walls of old houses and never leaves. There was a kerosene lamp on the dresser. The glass was chipped on one side. I don't know why I remember that, but I do. And it threw this orange light that made everything look softer than it was. He was standing by the window, not looking out, just standing there with his hands at his sides like he didn't know what to do with them. I was 19. No, I'd just turned 19, 3 weeks before. And I was sitting on the edge of a bed in a house I'd never slept in, wearing a nightgown my mother had sewn, and I didn't know what was about to happen. I mean, I knew. Everybody knows, but I didn't know. Nobody had given me the words. Nobody had told me what my body would do or what his body would do, or that there was supposed to be a conversation first. There was a rule, and the rule was simple. You obey. You lie still. You don't speak unless he speaks first, and you do not ever say no. That was my wedding night. I was 19 years old, and I had never seen my own husband without his hat. Quick pause. My name is Esther, and this is Esther Tales. If these stories stay with you, if they make you feel less alone, subscribe. It's free, and it's the reason I can keep telling them. Tell me in the comments, did anyone prepare you? Or did silence do the teaching? And if you want to go further, a super chat or a membership? That's you telling me these voices are worth hearing. That keeps this going. Now, back to what happened. Nobody sat me down. That's the thing nobody tells you. You'd think, with something that important, something that changes everything about your life in one night, you'd think someone would explain it. But in our community, the body was something you carried around like a chore, like the buckets you hauled from the well every morning. It was useful. It was necessary. But you didn't talk about it. You didn't name its parts. You didn't ask what it wanted because wanting wasn't something a body was allowed to do. The rule wasn't written in any book I ever saw. It lived in the air. It lived in the way my mother would leave the room if anything close to the subject came up. She'd suddenly need to check the bread, or she'd remember something in the cellar. It lived in the way the older girls at church would go quiet when someone got engaged, and then one of them would say, "She'll learn," and they'd all look at each other with this expression I didn't understand until it was too late. The wedding night belonged to the husband. That was it. That was the whole teaching. He would know what to do, because he was the man, and you would follow. And if it hurt, that was just the door opening. That's what my aunt called it, the door opening. Like pain was architecture. I almost asked once. I was maybe 15, and my cousin Leah had gotten married the spring before, and I saw her at a quilting circle, and she had this look. I don't know how to describe it except she looked like someone had taken something out of her and put it back in the wrong place. Her eyes were the same, but her mouth was different, tighter. And I opened my mouth to ask her something, I don't even remember what, and my grandmother put her hand on my knee. Just her hand. She didn't squeeze. She didn't say a word. She just placed her hand there, and I closed my mouth, and that was it. That was the education. A hand on a knee. Silence dressed as love. And I learned so well that by the time it was my turn, I didn't even have a question left to ask. The not knowing felt normal. It felt like faith. His name was Samuel. I need to say that because he matters in this story. Not as a villain, he was never that, but as someone just as lost as I was, standing on the other side of the same wall. We'd been courting for almost a year, which in our community meant supervised visits in the front room with my parents pretending not to listen from the kitchen. He brought me a carved wooden box once, He'd made it himself, oak, with a little latch that stuck. And inside, he'd put a folded piece of paper that said, "I will be good to you." That's it. 7 words. And I believed him. I still believe he meant it. He was 23. No, 24. I always get that wrong. He had these big, slow hands, and he talked like he was always afraid of saying the wrong thing, which meant he mostly didn't say much at all. I loved that about him. I thought quiet meant safe. The preparation, if you can call it that, came from my older sister, Miriam, 3 weeks before the wedding. She pulled me into the pantry, between the shelves of canned peaches and the bag of flour that had a mouse hole in the corner, and she said, "It'll hurt the first time. Just breathe through it. He'll be done fast." That was it. 13 words. I counted them later, lying in that bed, staring at the ceiling. 13 words for everything I was about to walk into. She didn't say where it would hurt. She didn't say what it was exactly. She didn't say I was allowed to say wait or slow down or stop. She didn't tell me those words existed in that room, because in her mind, in all our minds, they didn't. And Samuel? His preparation was worse, or maybe just different. His father told him it was his right and his responsibility, like it was feeding the horses, something you just did because it was yours to do. Nobody told him to ask me anything. Nobody told him there was something to ask. The room had a blue door. I remember because everything else in the house was white or brown, plain, the way things were supposed to be. But someone, maybe his mother, had painted that bedroom door a pale blue, almost like a sky you'd see just before it rains. The bed was pushed against the far wall, iron frame, a quilt his grandmother had made, wedding ring pattern, which I thought was beautiful that morning and couldn't look at the next day. There was a chair by the window with his suspenders draped over the back and his boots on the floor, lined up neat, toes pointing out. The window was cracked open about 2 inches, and I could hear crickets and, further out, a cow. The lamp on the dresser, that chipped one, made the room feel smaller than it was, warmer than it was. I was sitting on the edge of the bed in my mother's nightgown, white cotton, buttons up to my throat, and my feet were bare, and the floor was cold, and I was pressing my toes into the wood so hard they ached. He came in and closed the door and stood there. He didn't come toward me right away. He looked, I want to say scared, but that's not exactly it. He looked like a boy who'd been told to do a man's thing and couldn't find the man inside himself yet. He rubbed his palms on his trousers. He said, Is this? And then he stopped. He didn't finish. I didn't help him. I didn't know how. We just looked at each other across that small room with the blue door and the chipped lamp and the crickets outside, and neither of us had a single word for what was supposed to happen next. I smiled. I don't know why. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile you make when you don't have anything else to offer. He smiled back. Same kind of smile. And then he sat beside me, and the bed dipped under his weight, and I felt the mattress tilt toward him, and I held onto the edge of the quilt with both hands. His hand touched my shoulder. I stopped breathing. Not because I was afraid of him, I need you to understand that, but because my body didn't know what was happening. Nobody had ever touched my shoulder like that. Not with that weight. Not with that meaning. He said, "I'll be careful." And I think he believed it. I think he genuinely thought careful was enough. But careful without knowledge is just slow confusion. His hands were shaking. Mine were too. I wanted to pull away and move closer at the same time, and I didn't do either. I just stayed very still, the way I'd seen rabbits go still when the shadow of a hawk passed over the yard. That's what I became. A rabbit, holding perfectly still, waiting for something to pass over me. And it did. And it hurt. Not the way Miriam said, not like a sharp, quick thing, but like a slow ache that lived in places I didn't have names for. I pressed my tongue against the roof of my mouth so hard I thought I'd crack a tooth. I didn't make a sound. I didn't say stop. I didn't say wait. I didn't say anything. Because the rule was the rule, and I was a good girl, and good girls lie still. After, he rolled over and said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yes." The fastest word I ever spoke. I said it before I even checked, before I asked my own body. I just said it, because that was the only answer that existed. He fell asleep with his hand on my arm, and I lay there in that orange lamplight, and I stared at the quilt, and I found a loose thread near the hem. I pulled it, slowly. I kept pulling, watching the stitching come undone, one tiny loop at a time, and I didn't stop until I'd unraveled about 3 inches of his grandmother's work. Then I folded the edge under so nobody would see. And that, I didn't know it then, but that was the first time I hid damage. The first of hundreds. Neither of us understood that there was supposed to be a before, a conversation, a question. The word consent didn't exist in our world, not because it was forbidden, but because the concept itself had been removed, like pulling a thread from a quilt and folding the edge so nobody notices. He had been given authority. I had been given obedience. And between those two things, there was no room, no air, for the thing that was supposed to live there, the thing that makes it human instead of ritual. He wasn't trying to hurt me. That's what makes it worse. He was doing exactly what he'd been told to do, exactly the way he'd been told to do it. And so was I. 2 people following the same instructions, and the instructions were missing the most important page. The page that said, "She is a person. Ask her." I learned later, years later, that there's a word for what happens when someone doesn't know they're allowed to say no. When the absence of no gets counted as yes. I learned that word sitting in a therapist's office in a strip mall in Ohio, under fluorescent lights that buzzed. And when she said it, I felt the floor tilt. But that comes later. What I need you to understand right now is that on that night, in that bed, neither of us knew we were doing something wrong. And that's the kind of harm that doesn't leave a bruise. It leaves a silence. And the silence grows. The silence grew into a routine. That's how it works. You don't notice the shape of a cage when you're building it one day at a time. Tuesdays and Saturdays. I don't know how it became those days. Nobody announced it. It just settled, like sediment in a jar. He'd blow out the lamp, and I'd feel the mattress shift, and I'd go somewhere else inside my head. I got good at it. I'd think about the garden, which rows needed weeding, whether the tomatoes were getting enough sun. I'd plan meals. I'd count things. The boards in the ceiling. There were 43. I counted them so many times I could have drawn them from memory. Every crack, every knot, every water stain from the leak we never fixed above the kitchen. I learned to make my face soft, relaxed. I learned to make a sound at the right moment. Not too much, not too little. Because the one time I lay completely silent, he asked me what was wrong, and I didn't have an answer that wouldn't break everything. So I learned to perform okayness. I got so good at it, I almost convinced myself. Almost. But my hands always knew. They'd shake after, just slightly, just enough that I couldn't thread a needle for an hour. I started doing my mending in the mornings instead. I told myself it was the light. Better light in the mornings. That's the thing nobody tells you. You don't just survive it, you redecorate around it. You move the furniture of your whole life so nobody sees the stain on the floor. It was at a canning day, late August, the summer the peach crop came in so heavy the branches cracked, when I first realized I wasn't the only one. There were maybe 8 of us in Martha Yoder's kitchen, jars everywhere, the smell of boiling sugar so thick you could taste it. And Hannah Byler, who'd married the spring before me, She was standing at the counter slicing peaches, and she nicked her finger. Not bad, just a little cut. But she froze. She stood there staring at the blood on her thumb like she'd never seen blood before. And her lips moved, but nothing came out. And I watched her eyes go somewhere far away. Somewhere 43 ceiling boards away. I knew that look. I knew it like my own reflection. And our eyes met across that kitchen, and neither of us said a word. She just wrapped her finger in a cloth and went back to slicing. But she knew that I knew. And I knew that she knew. And we carried that knowing between us, like a stone in a shared pocket. And we never once spoke it out loud. Not once. Martha. Martha was older, married 11 years, and one time, only once, while we were hanging wash, she said, "The Lord asks us to be patient in all things." And the way she said all things, the weight she put on those two words, I understood she wasn't talking about laundry. By our 3rd year, I'd stopped counting the ceiling boards. I'd stopped going somewhere else, too. I just wasn't anywhere. I was present and absent at the same time, like a dress hanging on a hook, the shape of a person with nothing inside. The word was consent. I know that sounds simple. I know to most people watching this, that's just a word. But I heard it for the first time when I was 26 years old, sitting in a small office with a water stain on the ceiling, which almost made me laugh, except I didn't. And a woman named Dr. Reeves, who had reading glasses on a chain and a box of tissues she never pushed toward me. She just left it there, and I liked her for that. She didn't push anything. She drew a circle on a piece of paper, just a circle, and she said, "This is you." And then she drew a line through the middle of it and said, "This is what happens when someone else decides what your body does." And sorry, give me a second. I looked at that circle and I saw 19 years old. I saw the blue door. I saw my hands gripping a quilt. I saw myself lying perfectly still while a man I loved did something neither of us understood. And I felt the floor of that little office shift under my chair. Not anger, I want to be clear. I wasn't angry. I was sad. Devastatingly, completely, endlessly sad, because I realized that the girl on that bed, she didn't even know she was missing something. She didn't know there was a door she was allowed to close. She didn't know her body was hers. That's the thing nobody tells you. You can grieve for something you never knew existed. You can mourn a freedom you never once tasted. And it will hollow you out worse than losing something you actually had. The grief didn't come all at once. It came in layers, like peeling wallpaper off a wall and finding more wallpaper underneath, and underneath that, more. I grieved the wedding night. Then I grieved every Tuesday and Saturday for 3 years. Then I grieved the conversations we never had. The ones where I could have said, "Not tonight," or "Slower," or "Can we just talk first?" Then I grieved the fact that Samuel never knew to ask. Then I grieved for Samuel, because he was walking around with the same wound and didn't even know he was bleeding. I tried to explain it once, to a coworker, after I'd left, after I'd been outside the community for about a year. She was kind, she meant well, but she tilted her head and said, "But you loved him, right? So it wasn't really—" And she didn't finish the sentence. And I didn't finish it for her, and we both just stood there in the break room next to the microwave. And I understood then that there are things you can only explain to someone who already knows. The loneliness of that, of standing between two worlds, one that hurt you and one that can't understand how— I don't have a word for it. I've looked. I don't think the word exists yet. But here's what I need to say, and I need to say it carefully, because it's the truest and most complicated part. That community gave me things I still carry. Real things. Not ideas. things I can feel in my body when I close my eyes. The smell of bread in a wood-fired oven at 4 in the morning, when the whole house is dark except for the kitchen, and my mother's hands are white with flour and she's humming something. Not a song, just a sound, just a vibration in her chest that I could feel when I stood close enough. I still hum like that when I bake. I can't stop. It comes out of me like breathing. And the sound of horses at dawn, the way their hooves hit the frozen ground in January, that cracking rhythm, and the fog coming off their backs in the cold air. I'd stand at the fence and watch them and feel, I don't know, held by something bigger than the rules. And my grandmother's hands. She had these hands that were never still, always kneading, always mending, always moving. And when she prayed, they'd finally stop, and she'd fold them in her lap and close her eyes, and something in her face would open up, something soft and unreachable. And I thought, that's where God actually lives, not in the rules, in her hands when they're still. I am homesick for a place that hurt me. I hold that. I don't try to fix it anymore. And what happened in that bed? What happened every Tuesday and Saturday? What happened to Hannah and Martha and Leah and women whose names I'll never say on this channel? It wasn't cruelty. It was silence dressed up as holiness. It was a system that decided a woman's body was a gift she gave on her wedding day and never got back. And beauty and harm can live in the same house. I know that now. They shared a room my whole childhood. I'm not building a life against that place. I'm building a life that takes the bread and the horses and my grandmother's hands and leaves the silence behind. I'm choosing. Every day I'm choosing. And some days the choosing is easy, and some days I smell lavender and lye soap, and I'm 19 again, gripping a quilt, counting ceiling boards. But I'm here. I chose to be here. And I think that's enough. I think choosing is enough. If you grew up somewhere your body was kept from you, like something dangerous, like a secret you weren't allowed to know about yourself, I see you. If you lay still because still was the only option anyone gave you, I see you. If you loved someone and they loved you and it still wasn't enough to undo what the silence did, I see you. You are not broken. You survived something that was designed to be invisible, and surviving it, just getting to the other side of it with your eyes open, that is enough. If you're still inside and something in this felt familiar, I see you. If you left and you're grieving things you can't explain to anyone in your new life, I see you. If you're lying next to someone right now and you just realized you've never once been asked, I see you. If you recognized yourself 3 minutes ago and you're still watching because you needed someone to say it, I see you. And you are not alone. Wherever you are in this, I see you. And you are not alone. Leave me a comment. Tell me what you felt listening to this. Tell me the moment that stayed with you. Or just say, I'm here. That's enough. There is so much more I haven't said yet. I'm just getting started. There are stories I haven't been brave enough to tell, but I'm getting closer. If you want to be here when I do, subscribe to Grace Tales. And to the members and Super Chat family, you're the reason the next story gets told. If you want to be part of that, the door is always open. Your body was always yours. Always.